Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and it's Halloween. So it's only fitting that I give you something reasonably creepy to welcome in this time of the year. Now in truth, what I have in store for you today is actually a revisit of an ASMR-esque ambient stroke narrative reading that came along with a lore video on the different methods of infection by the flood. The introduction to that video being a version of what you're about to hear, with the differences being that it's been adjusted given the new lore that we now know. A few narrative changes have been made, but ultimately it remains broadly the same. But it is just the narrative reading, not all of the lore that comes afterwards. Oh, and of course it's been recorded with an appropriate pop filter, so you're not assaulted in the ears every 3 seconds. In either case, that's the introduction done for now, so settle in and get ready to be creeped out. You're a Marine. Over half a year ago, you and hundreds if not thousands of humans were stranded upon this Halo's surface when the Infinity, the ship you were attached to, arrived at Zeta Halo and was immediately attacked by the Banished. You evacuated the ship and landed upon its surface in a bumblebee escape pod on the edge of an immense savannah. Almost immediately thereafter, you and the survivors you were with witnessed an intense explosion on the ring almost a third of the way up spin, and the entire Halo then dove into slipspace and emerged in an unknown portion of space. For nearly 6 months, you and the other survivors regrouped and did what you could to coordinate in between sporadic attacks by the Banished. It appeared, however, that most of their interest was focused on the portion of the ring that the explosion took place at, now missing a large section of the ring's superstructural elements. Word eventually reached Echo Base that the Master Chief had returned and in just 24 hours managed to take down the Banished leaders and commanders and take down dozens of their strongholds, seizing control of that portion of the ring back from the Banished. It's been a week since you last heard anything from that portion of the ring. UNSC forces continue to muster and build a stronghold, but it seems very obvious that with the Halo in a completely different location than it was before, rescue parties looking to recover the survivors and bring them home were a long way from finding you. Luckily, the Banished, the primary threat on this ring, have no leadership, and thus the primary objective is simply to survive long enough for rescue. You're just settling down to sleep in the barracks with your brothers-in-arms in Echo Base on Zeta Halo. The camp is a large, heavily guarded forward operations base on the surface of the ring. The camp is guarded by a constant presence of ODSTs, commanded by a fire team of Spartan 4s, and every gun the UNSC has in this base is aimed outwards to threats that may stray too close to the camp. You are as safe as it is reasonable to be on this alien world. You begin to drift off to sleep, putting the day's activities behind you as you look forward to 7 hours of R&R, or as close as it can be to that, given the circumstances. Right as you're about to submit to sleep, a sound wakes you back up. You listen carefully to the ambience around you. You can hear the slow, sleepful breathing of the other Marines nearby. Your bunk creaks as your bunkmate above you shifts in their sleep. Occasionally the steady breeze outside picks up enough to be heard moving through the trees, and in the distance the periodic howl of the fauna beacons echo out across the landscape. Aside from the sounds of wildlife on this ring, you don't hear anything that outwardly draws your attention. You settle back down, trying to relax your senses back to a calm. The sound of a gut-wrenching scream and gunfire wrenches you back to your senses. The room erupts into motion. You, along with the rest of your unit, dive out of your bunk and scramble to get your gear on. The sounds of voices shouting can barely be heard over the gunfire. You've drilled countless times the process of getting geared up and ready, yet right now your heart is thumping in your chest and you find yourself fumbling to get sorted. An explosion outside briefly freezes the barracks into stillness. As the sound of gunfire returns, so does the motion in the barracks. A couple of Marines collide as they run to grab their weapons and knock over a supplies crate that clips your bunk on one of the leg latches. The collapsible two-sleeper bunk's leg folds and the uneven weight causes it to tip over, shedding some of your gear across the floor and falling on top of the rest. The rest of the Marines finish gearing up. They begin filtering out of the barracks to join the fight. You grab the few bits of your gear within arm's reach and climb into the now capsized bunk to retrieve your boots. As you put on your left boot, the gunfire draws closer and louder, but there are less guns firing. Over the sounds of people shouting orders and calling out targets, the blood-curdling screams of fallen soldiers can be heard. The last of the Marines have finished gearing up and have left the barracks. You are now the only one left, but you're going to be right behind them. You finish putting on your right boot, stand up, slap on your helmet, and get ready to leave the barracks to go arm yourself. That is until you notice the sound of the battle has stopped. You now stand alone in the centre of your barracks as you try to make sense of the sudden, eerie silence. Your mind now racing in the stillness you find yourself. The sound of your heart beating is practically all you can hear. There is no gunfire, no voices shouting orders, no screams, no wildlife, no breeze. Even the sound of the beacons seem to have fallen more distant. You stand in silence. A shadow darts past the entrance to the barracks. You tense in response. You reach for a weapon that you haven't yet collected and scan the room for anything you can use to defend yourself. Nothing. You take a few slow steps backwards from the entrance and wait. Nothing. Despite your fear, despite the silence, curiosity now begins to niggle at the back of your mind, and you find yourself taking steps towards the entrance. You stop just shy of a meter from the entrance and will yourself to crane your neck out of the doorway to get a clear view of the camp beyond. Slowly, the camp comes into view. It's dark, but the light reflecting off of the part of the halo ring further up spin grants enough light to see with relative clarity, save for the long, harsh shadows across the camp, which were basically all-consuming black voids. You scan the area and notice a familiar shape. There is a single person stood about 10 meters from your position at the corner of a polycrete building, partially obscured by shadow. They're not doing anything. They just stood there. You pluck up the courage to leave the barracks and cross the space between you and the only other friendly in the area. You advance steadily across the ground, scanning for any targets as you close on your only ally, keeping in a low crouch. You skirt the polycrete building, stepping into its shadow, and stop just short of touching distance when you notice a set of eyes looking back at you. They're surprised, shocked maybe, but something doesn't sit right. They're not looking at you, they're looking past you. You glance over your shoulder to follow their gaze and see nothing but across the camp. No movement, no apparent threat. You turn back, confused, and look into the eyes again, and that's when you notice it. They're the wrong way up. The eyebrows are on the bottom and the nose is facing skyward. The eyes focus slowly drifts from something akin to a 1,000-yard stare and focus on you. The expression the eyes give off now shift to something like fear, horror, even sadness. Then the person makes a noise. But it isn't a noise, it's more of a gurgling choke. Then it hits you. You're stood behind this person, not in front of them, and yet their eyes are looking straight at you. Your brain suddenly makes sense of what you're looking at. Like the optical illusions you used to enjoy as a child, the image resolves and suddenly reveals details that seemingly weren't there a second ago. The horror of what you're looking at steals the air from your lungs. The person's neck has been bent backwards at an impossible angle, the head now hanging limp down its back. You nearly stumble backwards in surprise, and the commotion draws its attention. The thing turns around, and from the chest of this humanoid form, there are now a dozen tentacle-like appendages whipping the air, like as many forked tongues of a snake tasting the air for your presence. The body is swollen and tumorous. A trio of meter-long tentacles now hang from its left arm. You're frozen in fear when the creature bellows a twisted, ear-splitting cry and whip-cracks its tentacles across your chest. The impact sends you flying backwards with the force of being hit by a warthog, and you land flat on your back 20 feet away. The air is knocked out of you, and you reach up to your chest to try to will your lungs to expand and draw in air. Your hand meets something warm and sticky. Through your dazed and blurred vision, you make out your hand slick with blood. Your blood. Your breathing is fast and shallow. Your heart is throbbing in your ears as you struggle to sit up. The creature that just struck you is gone. You look down to your chest to find your armor is cracked wide open and you have a deep cut to your chest. Under it you can see the white of your sternum. You hear a peculiar sound and look up to see a large bulbous squid-like creature dancing towards you on a flurry of tentacles. You try to push yourself backward away from it when your hand brushes something cold and metallic in the mud. Your hand recognizes the shape. You wrap your fingers around it and lift the pistol into firing position and squeeze off a single round into this tentacled squid. It pops and splatters you and the surrounding area in green, congealed blood. You spit some of the acrid-tasting blood from your lips and wipe some from your face in your sleeve. The green blood is thick and lumpy, as if it's already clotting. The wound on your chest is rapidly leaking blood down your front and it starts to itch. You need to get it treated with some biofoam as soon as possible. You remain still for a few moments, as the camp once again descends into silence. You look around, eyes darting between the dimly lit vistas and the shadow-engulfed corners of the camp, searching for movement, of any indication of a threat, or the relief of a familiar face. Nothing. You go to check the condition of the pistol, only to find that the mud covering the pistol is actually a combination of dirt, blood, and other vital fluids. You look to where you retrieve the pistol, and there is a large pool of the same mass of fluids and dirt, with obvious signs of struggle, and smears of blood heading off toward the perimeter of the camp. They could be anywhere. You could be surrounded. You could be the only Marine left alive in the camp, hell, on the entire ring, for all you know. You stand up abruptly. Pain lances across your chest as you do. You level the pistol and now, in your pain and panic, erratically start checking your corners, moving indiscriminately from shadow to shadow, spinning on your heels and checking your own six, only to spin around again in case you spent too much time looking in a single direction. Nothing moves. Nothing makes a sound. The darkness plays tricks on your eyes. As you see something move in your peripheral, you lock onto it, and it seems like as you lock onto it, you become blind to it. So you look away only for whatever it was to reappear in your peripheral, always avoiding your direct gaze. All you can hear is your own heartbeat, and the gentle rustle of the grass from the cool nighttime breeze. You remember there is a medkit in the command post. You slowly back into a shadow, seeking something solid to put your back against. Your back eventually touches the cold wall of one of the camp's larger fast fabrication buildings, and you slide along its wall until you find a corner. Your chest wound is becoming increasingly itchy. The corner bends into an alley of sorts, between two buildings, cloaked in darkness. The alley should lead to the main parade area, where it's only a short walk to the command post. Your eyes frantically darting back and forth, and then freeze as you hear a sound over your left shoulder coming from the darkness of the alley. You spin and fire a single round into the darkness, and the muzzle flash briefly lights up the alley as something jumps an inhuman distance into the air up onto the building's roof, and you hear the rapid impacts of running boots as whatever it was darts away. You take this opportunity and quickly move into the alley, scanning ahead. You stop, still in the shadows, just shy of the end, and scan the area beyond. It looks clear, but something feels wrong. Beyond the increasing discomfort of your wound, it feels like you're being watched, herded, hunted. You look back up the alley to check your six and notice a humanoid figure stood at the end, watching you. It twitches, thrashes the sensing tentacles in its chest, but otherwise remains stationary, watching, waiting. You can't take your eyes off it. The wound in your chest suddenly throbs and you lift a hand to cradle the wound. And as if prompted by this action, the humanoid figure surges into the alley. You backpedal and fire into the alley, but then something feels like it moves in the wound in your chest. You look down to find the green congealed blood of the squid is now festering in the wound in your chest. It feels like worms or maggots are wriggling around inside the wound. The sensation causes you to drop your pistol onto the floor and you try to claw at the wound, but the feeling of movement just burrows deeper into your chest. The sound of the closest beacon firing its blue plasma ball into the air draws your attention as it bathes the area in harsh blue-white light. And you suddenly notice the horde of twisted flesh boiling across the camp towards you, a mix of hundreds of those squid-like creatures, with the mutated remains of every single occupant of the camp following behind. Your shots had drawn their attention, and in the next 2 seconds they closed the distance between them and you. You fumble for the pistol, grab it and take aim, and fire rounds into the mass of flesh moving towards you. Before you can really react, the horde have closed the distance and 2 of the infected humans grab each of your arms. Now held in an impossibly tight grip, you can't move. The mass of flesh roil in front of you as a larger figure moves through the crowd. It's at least a head and shoulders taller than any human you've ever seen. As it emerges from the horde, you recognize the form of an elite. Heavily mutated, its long slender neck bent backwards out of view. It's missing one of its arms and one of its legs are lame. It carries the marks of plasma scoring. Whatever these things were, both humans and the Banished were on the menu. The flurry of tentacles on the chest of the cancerous mutated elite whip the air as it approaches close enough for the tips of those tentacles to almost brush your face. The elite's body then trembles and contorts and shudders as the tentacles at the chest begin protruding further, revealing one of the squid-like creatures you'd killed earlier had burrowed into the elite's chest. It emerges from its host and steps across the gap between you, wrapping tentacles around your body. You let out a terrified scream as you feel its tentacles dive into the wound on your chest. The damaged elite's body behind it shudders once more and collapses to the ground. You can barely see through the pain as it deflates its bulbous body and burrows into your chest cavity, forcing the organs aside. The humanoid forms restraining you let go and you collapse to the floor in pain and horror. You try to bring the pistol up to end your own misery when something forces your hand away. You squeeze the trigger anyway, firing off rounds into the night in protestation when something stops you from doing that too. Nothing is holding your arm. It's you. Something inside of you stops you from firing the weapon. You hear a buzzing in your ears. No, inside your head. You feel the most intense pain you've ever felt as your body is suddenly moved against your will, rolling you onto your front and into a crouch as you feel your left wrist and forearm snap, the bone bursting through the skin and 3 long tentacles suddenly exploding from the wound. You feel tentacles sliding around beneath your skin and your head being forced backward with immense force. You look towards the sky, the arc of the halo above you, as your neck meets its structural limit, and you hear some crunching and popping noises. The buzzing in your head begins to morph into a voice, a deep, twisted voice. And as your neck breaks and your view suddenly changes to an upside-down view of the camp, your vision begins to narrow, and as the darkness swallows you, the voice calls out and utters a single word. Consume. Thanks for watching. If you haven't already, consider hitting the subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss out on future content, and hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. It really does help the channel out significantly. Feel free to pop a comment below on anything you'd like me to cover next, and before signing off I just want to give a shout to my Patreon supporters, Spartan10148, my singular contender class ancilla, Falcon, Jordan and Poseidon, the metarchs of my facility, Sylphia, Ashley, Esoteric, Spartan 1029 and Chris Allen, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Legion, Labrat, Spartan 137, Chris, Element 0, J3, Mr. Keys, Gunslinger Cult, Evermore's Personal Devil, Scion Esports and Saber, my diligent sub-monitors, my dominating fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who continue to support the channel. I can't thank you guys enough. Big props to my Tier 0 YouTube members, Spartan137, Talia, Fenrir, Bornstella, and Jimbo, and all other YouTube members keeping the installation running on that glorious vacuum energy. And if you really love what I'm doing here, consider supporting the channel via the links in the description. Much love, take it easy, and find peace in the domain.